The first rule of Fight Club is you do not talk about Fight Club. On this special edition of Less Than 2000, podcaster Chris Wolfe joins us in studio to break that rule. Chris had us on his podcast, and today we return the favor. Chris specifically asked to talk about Fight Club, and today we take a deep dive into the movie, the book, its statement about 90s consumerism, and its lasting influence on society today. Less Than 2000, the podcast. This is probably going to come as a big surprise to no one. I don't like advertising.
You can't start me off on that foot because that's like obvious. That's like saying, holy shit, the sky's blue. And somebody goes, no way.
So you're telling me that it's very on brand for me to hate brands, basically.
It is. I wish there was a way that we could Fight Club the advertising into the show, subliminally flash up, like and subscribe, tell your friends, or something like that, to where we're not actually doing it, because we don't want to go down the road like everybody else of saying, make sure you like and subscribe and tell your friends, because then you're just kind of pandering to your audience. And I hate that as much as you do.
Wow, you nailed it, man. I completely agree. So we have resisted the urge so far to do what every other podcast does, which is say, remember to like and subscribe. But here's the thing. Until people actually do it, we gotta say it, man.
Like our show or you will die.
Very good. And without further ado, let's bring on Chris Wolfe, our guest, to talk about Fight Club. Really, nobody cares about being a doctor, actually. A doctor, father of 8. You're best known as the podcaster, as a podcasting legend, Chris Wolfe, ladies and gentlemen. He had us on a show not too long ago. Tell us about your show. Tell us about how you've established such a great following.
Well, I think, thanks for that. I think, in general, the show is about eyes. It's about mainly for people who are eye doctors and healthcare providers, but we sort of run the gamut from practice management things to talking about infectious disease, especially in the times that we're in. I try to find people that maybe disagree with me on some things. And so we just basically go where our conversation takes us. And naturally, that's going to be around healthcare and eye care and running busineses. So how did you guys get on this?
That's what my question was going to be. How the hell did we get on? I know I'm a doctor, but...
Yeah, so
I guess the real answer is, how'd that Chad guy get on?
Yeah. So and in general, I like to have interesting conversations with people who I think are interesting. And I think there's things that are relevant to our profession that we can glean from other people. Still, that doesn't answer why I had you all on. Mainly,
that's right.
Mainly the reason I had you on is that I wanted to have fun. I enjoy your podcast. On my way to go to bed, basically, when we were camping, I saw Chad posted something about it, and I heard it, and I thought, I love this. And I want to give you guys an opportunity to come on and we can talk about current events and past events and how that relates to now and how we can get information from, just to enjoy our time, maybe think about something different.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having us on. And, I got to be honest, since we pretty much live, pre-2000. So it was kind of fun to talk about something that wasn't just the 80s and 90s and kind of get a little relevant. So thanks for having us on.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks for having me on.
We gave you the choice of topic. Anything 80s and 90s under the sun. What did you choose?
So I picked Fight Club, and mainly it was because I had watched it. Well, I liked it, right? I liked it a lot. But also I had watched it just by random chance, maybe a week or two before you guys had come on and done the show. And so I thought, hey, it's a great one.
Now, you had seen it before.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, I just want to be absolutely clear. I knew you had, but I want everybody to know you had seen it. You just rewatched it recently and said, wow, we have to talk about this movie.
Yes.
I for one think it's one of the best movies ever made. I hold it in high regard. I put it up there with 2001: A Space Odyssey. I put it up there with in probably my top 5 serious movies. It is that amazing to me. I thought it was very cutting edge. I thought it had a good message. It doesn't provide any answers whatsoever, but it poses the question, sheds a light on society, especially at the time, in a really interesting, fun way. The performances were great. The writing was great.
Well, now this will be fun.
Yeah. Well, thanks for choosing a good movie.
Yeah,
I appreciate it. Now, Chad and I have the debate often about American Beauty versus Fight Club. Which one is the better movie?
Which I tell him you cannot put those in the same category. They're so different because Fight Club is big, worldly, it sets up a lot of the world problems, and American Beauty is very intimate and very singular and family oriented. So to me, two totally separate categories.
I'd agree with you, Chad. I think totally different categories. Obviously they both scratch at the underbelly of society. Sure. One in a more traditional sense of what's going on in the basement of your house or in your garage, right?
Yep.
Versus, a sort of burn it all down.
Setting up mass terrorism and bringing down a system.
Yeah.
It's a guy, American Beauty is a guy smoking weed in his garage because he said, F the man, I'm done.
We can bring that to the movie Fight Club now because so many studios passed on doing the movie. No, because it was so controversial. It was violent. It was, and also keep in mind the context. This was supposed to come out in May of 1999. You know why it was delayed until later in the summer? Anybody remember what happened in April of 99? It was the first one of its kind.
Columbine.
Yep. And there's violence. There is not just violence, but it's like insurrection. And there's one scene in particular that I can't believe they left in. It was very controversial. They were going to take it out. But when Edward Norton's talking to his boss, and he's like, I'd be very careful with that person. That person's sick. He'll take an AK-47 and shoot one person after another. And this, and it's like cold and chilling. And it's like super creepy. But they're like, we cannot release this after that just happened.
I guess as a young, impressionable adult, right, first year in college, seeing that movie, my impression from it was the independence of a person and then the humanity of that person, right? Like he was, I know that's not probably what you got out of it, right? He had this collective of a bunch of people that were kind of rising up, but it was, you are not your stuff. You are not the sum of the things you have, of the money you earn. Now, my take of it was that it might be, those things might enable you to do the other things you might want to do. But you are a human. You actually, even though there was sort of this collective burn it all down, we're all going to be the same. His name is Robert Paulson, right?
Yeah.
It was that the person was not just the sum of his stuff.
Very well said. I think I need to have you talk to my wife. Can you sit down with her? Because I think she would have something to learn from this conversation. She doesn't listen to the show, so
tell her to watch the movie. It definitely touches upon that, and it shows you that I think one of the big themes is consumerism was so rampant. I mean, this is the height of the go-go 90s. I mean, this is like the pinnacle of our culture. I remember talking on your show about how everything changed after 9/11 and society's never been the same since. Mm-hmm. I mean, that was like the high watermark of America, as far as I'm concerned, of corporate America, of sponsorship. You'll notice that in every single scene, there's a Starbucks cup in it.
Is there really?
There's branding all over the place.
Well, that was done on purpose. That was a very specific. Right. I mean, it was to show that consumerism. But that's been going on since the 80s. But the 80s was really the height of that, a super rich, stock market, everybody doing blow, getting rich. By the 90s, it was sort of, 80s, by the 90s, it was starting to sort of get ridiculous.
Right. Absolutely.
But you don't think it's more ridiculous now?
Yes, I do. I do think it is. We're now on the other end of that curve, and I think it's just as bad as it ever. If anything, it's worse. Because a movie like Fight Club could get made. I mean, there was not everything back in the day was strictly a product. There was art back then. Now it's every single thing is mass market appeal. Every band, everything you see on TV. This is why I hate new shit.
Well, see, I think you're not digging deep enough. Go deeper with this, because there's with the internet, and I mean, just saying the word internet makes me sound like an old. But we have so much access to anything. If you don't want to listen to that mass-produced crap, you don't have to. If you want to get access to independent artists or to independent movies, there are more independent movies made than ever before. So we have more access to more stuff. You just got to find it.
Yeah. How do you find it? Because the studio puts all their eggs in the big brand basket.
It's called the internet.
To Adam's point, you
should know this. You're a podcaster. You can't do. Yeah. You can't
point fingers. To Adam's point,
he's looking to his right.
To Adam's point, it's it's the case that once you have a big enough market share, and that is the problem. I do think that in terms of socialism and capitalism, it's once capitalism becomes so big that it can actually become a monopoly and steal business from others.
Let me give you some background. Of course, Fight Club came out in 1999, based on the 1996 book by Chuck Palahniuk. Very hard to spell, very hard to pronounce, but I heard him say it. It's Chuck Palahniuk. He got $10,000 for this book, for the film rights, $10,000. So imagine making the biggest, best book of your entire career, and you sold it for $10,000 because you're a starving artist, and at the time, it was a lot of money for him. I mean, he's also written some other great stuff. This is definitely the highlight of his career.
For such a long movie, I'm surprised this book is only like 218 pages.
The original draft of the script, they did a read, 6 hours.
No.
Of this?
Yeah. And it is a very quick book. You can read it in a day or two. So Jim Uhls did the screen adaptation for it. Nailed it. I mean, he took this book and adapted it perfectly to screen. And I'm so glad he did it. They were going to go with Buck Henry, who was the person who wrote the screenplay for The Graduate, 1967. There is some overlap. This is kind of the modern version of The Graduate. They wanted Peter Jackson to be the director.
Here's the reason why they might have given it to him. I will say this. Little known fact. Peter Jackson did Meet the Feebles. It was like Muppets on acid, trippy, weird shit. Yep. So it's not a stretch that he could have been up for Fight Club. I just don't think it would have been nearly as good of a movie than David Fincher.
But it was David Fincher who did it, who of course did Seven right before this. And fantastic movie, another one with Brad Pitt. Mm-hmm. And he also did Alien 3, which he hates. He hated it because the studio him on it and didn't let him do what he wanted to do. And he was like the 4th or 5th director into it. So that movie wasn't
it was
good.
Aliens 3. You knew the studio was going to screw that one up. Yeah, they had all the power at that point.
Get this. So instead of Brad Pitt, their number one choice was Russell Crowe.
Oh, for Fight Club?
Yep.
Oh.
Their number one choice for the Edward Norton character, who is unnamed. He does not have a name. The character does not have a name. He's known as the narrator or Jack. But that's not his official name. They wanted Sean Penn. So could you imagine this with Russell Crowe and Sean Penn with Peter Jackson directing?
Oh my God. I mean, I can see Sean Penn before I can see Russell Crowe.
At the time, though, Sean Penn, in my mind, was still...
the guy from Fast Times at
Fast
Ridgemont
Times.
High.
No,
Yeah.
that was
He's Spicoli.
That
was
was
Spicoli.
16 years earlier.
I know, but
that was
still,
16
in
years
my mind, he
earlier.
was still Spicoli. What else had he done between then and Fight Club? There was nothing else that Spicoli did.
His bigger stuff has come after.
Yeah.
Since then. Why I think Edward Norton is fantastic in this movie is he's just like an everyman. He plays there's nothing really remarkable about him that like takes you out of the movie. There's nothing that like, wow, Sean Penn, you're watching Sean Penn. But Edward Norton at the time, I mean, he was coming off of Primal Fear, 1996, great movie. Mm-hmm. The People versus Larry Flint, 1996, and American History X, 1998. One of the best movies ever.
Of course. So that's crazy. I actually, in my mind, kept thinking that American History X was after Fight Club.
Did I.
Because what a way to play a character where he is super ripped in American History X. And then he's sort of like, just like you said, an average Joe.
He looked really skinny and kind of
story about that. So he started bulky because he's coming off of when he's playing a prison racist with prison tats and the big pecs and all that stuff. He actually started starving him. They shot this movie in sequence. He started starving himself as the movie went along, so he got more and more thin. Meanwhile, Brad Pitt was working out more. Brad Pitt made such great career choices in the 90s. Like he again, according to the commentary track, David Fincher basically said he would only choose roles that made him look awesome. Like he was the hitchhiker in Thelma and Louise. He was in Legends of the Fall, Interview with the Vampire with Tom Cruise, and like, man, the girls love that. Of course, he was in 7, and then 12 Monkeys. Who didn't like his perforance in 12 Monkeys?
That was such a good movie.
It was a good
all the
movie.
way through Snatch.
Oh,
he always played
that
like
was my
a
favorite.
cool guy.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like just a cool,
and
interesting
still
character.
did in 2019 in Tarantino's Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
It was a good movie.
That was a great movie.
Yeah.
So the movie had a budget of $63 million. Only made $100 million in the international box office. Only made $37 million US in the U.S. Chad, are those good numbers?
No, those are absolutely terrible numbers.
But it became a cult classic. I mean, it came out on DVD and word of mouth and everything. But you got to also keep in mind that weirdos like, I'll say me, that love this movie, I wasn't going to see it in a theater. Like, I don't see movies in theaters.
Especially wearing the salmon shirt with the cactus that you're wearing.
I'm wearing another wild shirt.
Yeah. So speaking of weird.
So Chuck Palahniuk wrote this book while he was in a corporate environment like Edward Norton was. Like, he was in boardroom meetings scribbling this stuff down. And he came up with the rules as a literary device. Like, he was taking a writing class, and he needed, like, things to punch from one thought to another. So that's where the whole book came from. And he said he was like actually in those meetings while the guy was talking about, could I have that in cauliflower blue? And could you make these your primary action items? I mean, they just nailed the corporate speak so well.
So basically, like the person who doodles in those board meetings, he was actually penning out an entire novel.
Yeah.
Sitting in that, coming up with all of this, establishment rhetoric.
When your goal is to come up with cauliflower blue in a board meeting, then you probably have time to write Fight Club.
That's true. Fair enough, Chris.
Yeah, Meatloaf is a great actor, though.
Why wasn't he in more movies? Do you think it was just because he didn't care? Or do you think it was because, they just didn't see him as a great actor? Because first time I watched it, I didn't know I was Meatloaf.
Yeah.
It was probably the third or fourth time when I finally realized that the credits at the beginning say Meatloaf.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, he's just got this sincerity to him. Like, he played that character so well. And he's going to the cancer support group, and he's like, just hearing his voice, you can really feel the emotion. His wife had left him. His kids don't talk to him. He's got because he's taking steroids. He's got no balls.
Yeah.
And you really felt the feeling. And then when he comes back later in the third act or whatever, and he's all fired up about Fight Club changing his life, you're like, yeah, Bob.
Go, Bob.
And then, okay, we're going to start getting into spoiler territory here. This one isn't the major one or anything, but Bob dies. Bob gets shot on one of these Project Mayhem things, and that's where his name is Robert Paulson. And what a great thematic way to take this, really the only lovable character in the movie, and blow his brains out as part of this Project Mayhem stuff. I don't know, just well-written character, well acted.
I mean, the whole thing was great. Edward Norton's, just the tone of his voice being the narrator of this.
And not only the narration, but they break the fourth wall. There are times when he literally turns to the camera and talks directly to us as the audience. And later in the movie, Brad Pitt starts talking directly to the camera and shaking and all that stuff. And so but for some reason it works. It doesn't really take you out of the movie because the movie's so interestingly written and shot that it's just kind of...
It almost lets you into the psychosis of Jack, right?
Yeah.
Almost where you could see he's talking to himself. You can see he's talking to his imaginary, or his other personality. Is he really talking to Marla? Does he remember stuff he's saying to Marla? And it like you said, it all works. The idea of blowing your mind. Now it's almost like you watch a movie and the twist is obvious. You're just waiting for the twist, and there's one twist, and that's it. And in this one, it was perfect. Like, how do you get a perfect twist like that at the end where you realize, like, and by the time you see it, it's like, oh, that makes sense, as opposed to like, oh, that was cheap and obvious.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I mean, especially the way they blended the conversations and the characters together. Sometimes as an audience, we were let into the conversations that they were having. And sometimes you found out that you weren't in on the conversations. And it wasn't until you knew that they were the same, that this was an alternate personality, it starts coming together. But even then, you're still grasping, you're still now trying to put all the pieces together. And I think that's what makes it so incredible.
And you start doing it as a viewer, as Edward Norton's figuring it out. They're in the hotel room, and Brad Pitt's like, you got it. You're almost there. Why do you think people think we're the same person? Come on, And it's like you start piecing that together, and you see little flashes of it, and you're like, oh, and I think it is a great twist.
Yep.
And you don't see it coming. It is a little bit more obvious in the book. But, of course, knowing the twist, you see the breadcrumbs a little bit.
One of the coolest things that I ever thought about this is how Brad Pitt shows up in the movie 11 times or something like that, or 8 times, before you even know who he is. He's a waiter on one of the TV shows. When he's talking,
flashes of him.
They flash him in.
Yes.
They literally flash Brad Pitt in for like 3 frames. So it's like 1/6 of a second.
Yeah.
So your mind will never actually see it. But if you're paying really close attention subliminally, there's something there. And they do this like 11 times.
Do you think that works?
No,
I'd have to go back.
I don't think it does.
It might. I don't know.
I don't think it actually works. I just think it's the coolest Easter egg.
Right. My mind's going to how long, thinking how long does something have to be exposed in your visual system to be able to register even a subliminal, hint. And I'm sure they would have hopefully done some research on that.
But don't they even talk about that in the movie where like Coca-Cola would splice a couple frames into the movie?
No, it was the guy with the
popcorn or
wiener.
Coke?
Well,
no, in the
Tyler Durden was
Tyler
putting
Durden, yeah.
single frames of porno into kids' movies, and then the funniest Easter egg is at the very end, right before the credits.
Yes.
You just see a flash of that.
Yeah, you do.
It's fucking hilarious. And apparently, the studio made them use a with black
Bruce Willis.
pubic hair. Exactly. It couldn't be blonde because then people would think it was Brad Pitt's.
Oh,
So they actually made sure you're like, there's no way that's Brad's.
But I mean, it's full frontal nudity in an R-rated movie.
well, that didn't happen much back then.
No. Fincher said like the hardest thing for him to do would be like the lovemaking scene in Top Gun, like really passionate, like silhouette, like take my breath away. There's your singing for the episode. So the send up of 90s capitalism, it catalogs the products very much the way that American Psycho does. There's the scene in his condo where it's the
Labels,
IKEA catalog, and everything is labeled. Later on, he's talking about the Horchow collection and Gucci this and that, and it's that the height of 90s capitalism at least, and you see that he's not satisfied. None of that. He's unfulfilled, so he's got to create an alter ego, and he's got to create a club where he can literally get his face bashed in to feel something.
Ultimately, do you think that took over, that satisfied long term? So that's what happens at the end. You don't know, right? He gets Marla, he gets half of his brain blown out,
Yeah.
and you see it all crumble. Mm-hmm. So the question that you always ask, or that I ask, right, to get to the deeper level is that satisfying to him? Did what he create do what he wanted it to do?
I mean, for me, I'd rather have capitalism and buy a bunch of crap that I don't care about. Mainly because I want the other half of my face
Yeah, of
there.
course.
I mean, like, the ending of that when he's standing there with just, the hole in his head and blood coming out. They're like,
get some gauze.
They're holding on to each other as they watch all the banks crash. I mean, there's something so justifying and awesome
Of course.
about watching that crash. But then you really are left with like, well, now what?
You got Marla.
You got Marla, and I'm sorry, Marla wasn't that great. She
got
been
better toward the end, but she was not all
She was a
there.
lunatic.
Yeah.
She was a lunatic.
Yes.
But what's interesting about Marla, the first time you watch it and you don't know the twist, you think she's evil. You think
Correct.
she's a bad person because she's got this affair going with Brad Pitt, and then she's always hitting on Edward Norton. Later, you realize they're the same person, and she's actually trying to form a
Yes.
relationship with the guy, and he's just. Tyler's not here anymore. Like, just total psychopath.
Yeah.
It's like, he's gone, like,
So that's interesting because, I got that. And when I watched it this time, this was the first time, the most recent time I watched it, was that I actually had some empathy for Marla at the end. When I was younger, I had no empathy for Marla. It was just, she was crazy the whole time. And you can see that it wasn't really her that was crazy. She was a little bit kooky, right?
Yeah, I mean,
A little.
She goes to support groups.
She was crazy.
kooky.
Yeah.
She's kooky.
But that's the
She's
cool
trying
thing
to
about-
get better.
Yeah, that's the thing. Yes, that you just named it. She was trying to get better. That's what this movie does. There's so many layers to it where you go like, everybody's trying to get better. They're trying to go to support groups. They're trying to create happiness. They're trying to find what makes them happy. And that's what humanity is. That's what life is. Finding the things that make you happy. They were crazy and wanted to fight and, create a world and a society that would tear down the banks and all that kind of stuff. Did that make them happy?
I want to go back to the question you posed. I don't. It's really interesting. So the movie never gives you an answer. It identifies issues He rejects all of it. He fantasizes. He creates the Ubermensch. He creates his ideal person to be what he cannot be as a human being.
And he takes him out.
And then he takes him out. That's exactly right. So he rejected capitalism and that vapid life. But then he also rejected the new world that he created. And at the left, you're just left, what the hell just happened?
Well, and that, I mean, remember The Graduate?
Yes, absolutely.
I mean, there was nothing greater at that moment in cinema history where he busts in, they run off together, and then they get in the back of the bus and they're just sitting there and it's like, now what? And you leave that movie like, oh God, I don't know if they're going to be okay. And that's kind of what Fight Club does. They finally got it. Did they? Because I mean, like...
So it takes you in a bunch of different places. I'm sure that it took you someplace else that it took me, and probably you got to go someplace else after that in your mind, right? And that's the beauty. That's one of the beauties of the movie, is that we can all sort of get our own thought of what happens to Marla and Jack.
Sure. It allows for us to have conversations about capitalism, about life, what makes you happy. There's a lot of things that you can then break down.
Does Chuck ever go into that in any of his narratives?
I was just about to get a spoiler for the book. The narrator ends up in a mental institution with half of his brain blown out. He's like catatonic and incommunicative, but all the nurses coming up to him are like, it's going to be okay, Mr. Durden. They're all the space monkeys. They're all the Project Mayhem people that are like, we're going to bust you out. It's all under control. So he doesn't... there was a conscious choice by Fincher to go away from... Like, he rejects Tyler at the end of the movie. In this one, he's still... It's unclear. So in the book...
Can't wait to read the book.
You know, it's funny because so many times filmmakers actually get the book wrong and don't do it justice. These are one of the few moments where you go, there's a lot of really great things that the filmmaker did. Because I liked the way they left it in the movie. I liked that Fincher left you to then go, you've got what you wanted. Now what would you do with the world? Because that's what the whole setup is.
Because you wanted that to happen. The crazy part is, no matter if you're a socialist or a capitalist, you wanted everything to burn, you're an anarchist, you wanted that thing to crumble, right? At the end of the movie.
Yeah.
And then you get it. Right? And then what?
And then what do you do now?
This is a great quote by David Fincher. I just want to read it verbatim. We're designed to be hunters, and we're in a society of shopping. There's nothing to kill anymore. There's nothing to fight, nothing to overcome, nothing to explore. In that societal emasculation, this everyman, the narrator, is created. He got it. I mean, Fincher wanted to do this, but, there's comedy in it.
That's a good form of art, because you can't just be all down. You can't be all one note. That's also not life. So essentially, the more you're going to tear down, the more you better inject some sort of comedy or other heart or feeling to contrast that. Otherwise, it's almost unwatchable.
One of the other major themes I see is the relationships between sons and fathers. I've met people who have lost their fathers, men and women who have lost their fathers really young, and that really colors their worldview. That relationship between father-son is so key. And it's just kind of glanced at, just kind of hinted at here. And then when Tyler leaves Edward Norton after the car crash, he disappears, and then Edward Norton tries to find him, and then the big reveal happens. It's like he was abandoned by his father again. But keeping in mind, it's the same guy. Right. The guy's entirely in his head. So it's just a... interesting little side theme.
Obviously, it was purposeful throughout the book.
The novel was written shortly after his father's murder. Fred Polinick died after his girlfriend's former partner shot them both and then dragged their bodies to a cabin to burn.
And now Fight Club really makes sense. Now we know why the author wrote this book. We're not laughing at the tragedy.
Oh my goodness.
To be a brilliant writer and to do these things that have lasting appeal that make us think for generations, you gotta be pretty up.
And this is no joke, because taking this after you, there's no joke here. They say write what you know.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, when you have something that traumatic happen to you, and you feel compelled to have to put it down and to share your art with the world, you're going to end up with something great like Fight Club.
Hopefully, or you'll wind up in a mental institution because you can't articulate it very well. I mean, it's I didn't know any of that. Did you know that before I just brought that up?
I did
know. That is crazy. It gives you a different perspective.
Now you really want to read the book.
Yeah, of course.
So where can we find your show?
You can find it on all your podcast listening apps. If you just search iCode Media, it'll pop up.
iCode Media.
Yeah, so EYECODE Media.
Like and subscribe.
Give us a 5-star review. Share it with your friends.
Absolutely. Thanks for having us on, dude.
Thank you, man.
And thanks for being here.
It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, this is great.